Constantinidis. Yes, thank you. My name is Maria Constantinidis. I am a member of the Holliston Democratic Town Committee, and this event is being sponsored by the Holliston Democratic Town Committee and our state rep, James Arena DeRosa. We're recording this, as you heard, and we will be posting it on YouTube on the Holliston Democratic Town Committee website. And we'll email everybody and tell them once it's available, because it'll take a few days before we can do that. The Holliston Democratic Town Committee is an organization that encourages citizens to register to vote, to organize, work for candidates they support, and to serve on local boards and committees by running for office or volunteering. We advocate for the causes and concerns that matter to us locally, regionally, nationally, and globally. We promote discussion on issues through public awareness, candidate debates and open forums, editorials and letters to the editor, and presenting information at public meetings and hearings. We work towards government that is fair and transparent in its dealings with the public. We represent the principles of the Democratic Party by electing delegates from the community to participate in party activities and decision-making at the state and national levels. We are a community of activists and friends. We are caring and engaged citizens. I would now like to introduce our speakers, Jesse Canson-Benanev, I think I got it right, with Abundant Housing Massachusetts, and Brian Clancy, Senior Vice President, Capital Markets. Our moderator will be Representative James Arena DeRosa. Haley Vetro had a last-minute business conflict and will not be here. She's in another town. Jesse grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, and currently lives in Jamaica Plain. He has over 15 years of experience in real estate development, public policy, and community engagement. Prior to joining Abundant Housing Mass, he served as the senior project manager at B'nai B'rith Housing, New England, where he managed affordable housing work, including the design, permitting, financing, and construction of new developments. In 2019, he was awarded the Housing Rising Star Award from Metro Housing. Champions of Housing honors leaders in our community who share our passion and commitment to ensuring that everyone in Greater Boston has a place to call home. Jesse is a noted community organizer and founded ABC Cambridge, a community-based organization advocating for increased housing production and smart growth development in Cambridge and in Greater Boston. As a result of his successful leadership of ABC, Jesse was recognized by the Boston Globe magazine in 2016 as a game changer for his and ABC's positive contributions to improving the Massachusetts economy. Jesse has a master's and city planning degree from MIT. Brian Clancy brings over 30 years of real estate investment development and finance expertise to national development and is responsible for oversight and implementation of debt capital market strategies and investment capitalization for the company and its private equity funds. Brian has broad debt and equity financing expertise with a variety of lenders, investors, and joint venture partners, which he has utilized to evaluate the financial feasibility of new sites and acquisitions of all asset types to maximize investment potential and to structure complex real estate transactions. Brian is involved with a number of civic, charitable, and industry-related organizations. He's a past member of the Holliston Housing Committee, which set up the Holliston Housing Trust, of which he is now president. The trust has created 6 affordable single-family homes, subsidizing the purchase with CPA trusts and trust funds, and 3 homes in partnership with Habitat for Humanity. He is past president of the Metro West Greater Worcester chapter of Habitat for Humanity and currently treasurer and member of the board. The success of the chapter earned recognition from the Mackenzie Scott Foundation, receiving a $3.5 million grant to continue its successful efforts to create affordable housing and to increase the impact of the affiliate. With those funds, the chapter has set out on a 3-year strategic plan to create 30 homes in 3 years and to create a sustainable format to continue scaling its operations. In partnership with the town of Holliston, Habitat administered a critical home repair program for Holliston seniors in concert with the Holliston Senior Center using ARPA funds. Professionally, he is a member of the Real Estate Finance Association of the Greater Boston Real Estate Board, a member of NAIOP Massachusetts, and a past director of the 495 Corridor Partnership. He has also been a guest lecturer at various colleges and universities, including BU, Babson College, Harvard Business School, and MIT. Brian graduated with a BA from Tufts with a degree in international relations with concentrations in Spanish and applied music. He lives here in town in Holliston with his wife Andrea of 35 years, where they raised their 3 children, Benjamin, Gregory, and Sarah. Our moderator is our state representative and co-sponsor, James Arena DeRosa. He was elected to the House of Representatives in 2022. Representative Arena DeRosa has spent his entire life in public service and advocacy. After completing his education at Xaverian High School and Harvard, his professional journey began as a special assistant to the Mass Secretary of State, where he focused on citizens' rights, voting, and public records. As the Director of Public Advocacy at Oxfam America and the New England Director of Peace Corps, he focused on advocacy on an international stage. His passion for land rights and food security continued under the Obama administration as the Northeast Regional Administrator at USDA Food and Nutrition. He's representing the towns of Holliston, Hopkinton, Sherborne, and Millis. Representative Arena DeRosa now channels a lifetime of public service knowledge into advocating for his communities while addressing pressing issues such as climate change, reproductive rights, veteran services, supporting public education, workers' rights, healthcare, and expanding affordable housing. I'm not sure how to turn that off. Okay. Okay.
All good. Well, thank you, Maria, and thank you all for joining us this evening, both here at Town Hall and also on Zoom. Thanks so much to the committee, the DTC, the volunteers here. Certainly thank you to the town, and of course, our speakers that you're going to be hearing from in a few minutes. It's such an honor to serve the town of Holliston. I know we have some folks also from other towns. I represent Sherborne, Hopkinton, and Millis as well. And I will tell you that of all the issues that we're working on, housing is probably the most challenging one and the most important one that we have to deal with in the years ahead. It's important for the community. It's important for the Commonwealth. It's important for the country, and lots of challenges ahead. So in terms of our format, what we're going to be doing is we're going to hear from the speakers. We're going to start with Jesse and give one of our sort of broader overview, and Brian's going to talk more locally, although he's been involved in a lot of different issues as well. They're both going to speak for 10 minutes. I then might have one question for each of them. And then we're going to open it up to the audience. Just a few notes. If you ask a question here in Town Hall, you need to speak into a microphone that we'll have available so that the people can hear you on Zoom. And then I think with Zoom, I'm not sure if they're going to actually be able to speak other than our designated co-host. Okay, so we're going to try to let you actually ask your questions. We'll see. If not, I can read it off the screen. But thank you all again for coming. Some of you have had a chance to meet Jeff Myers, my staff. We are a staff of 2. So if anytime you're getting help from my office, it's just as likely him as me. So I'm so appreciative of his work as well. So thanks again for all of you for coming. And we're going to have Jesse kick it off. Jesse. Jesse, you're muted.
Yeah. All right. Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting there. I apologize. But thank you, Representative. And thank you for the introduction. Thank you for having me tonight. I apologize that I can't be there in person. I have a 5-year-old at home. And so, sometimes things get a little crazy. I am, as the introduction said, I'm Jesse Kanson-Benenov. I am the Executive Director at Abundant Housing, Massachusetts. AHMA for short, AHMA. We're a relatively young organization. We were founded in 2020. I've been in this role as executive director since 2021. Our focus as an organization, real briefly, is to address the affordable housing crisis that we have in Massachusetts, particularly here in Eastern Massachusetts. That's really starting to hit people of all income levels. We're very concerned as an organization and really as a housing movement in Massachusetts about the availability of homes that people can afford to own or to rent, all across our region. We recognize here at Abundant Housing Massachusetts that challenges issues like zoning, in particular, are a real barrier to building the homes we need. I'll get in a second into some of the sort of data behind that. At Abundant Housing Massachusetts, we want to make sure that we are building communities across the state that are open and welcoming to people of all identities, all stages of life, really, living the progressive values that we often as a state purport to hold. Unfortunately, that's just not the reality in many communities across Massachusetts, and particularly Eastern Massachusetts. Many communities use zoning in a way that actually limits our ability to build the homes that current and future residents of our Commonwealth need. And by limiting what you can build in a community to all but very large single family homes. We're not opposed to single family homes, but when that's the only type of home that's available or allowed to be built in many places, you do have a direct impact on who actually has access to those communities. And that's why we see real stark racial and economic segregation across Eastern Massachusetts, and really across the state. And even within communities, thinking about in some communities, there are wealthy neighborhoods, there are poor neighborhoods, there are Black neighborhoods, there are white neighborhoods. We want to build a more integrated Commonwealth, and that's what we're trying to do through local organizing on the grassroots level, as well as state policy advocacy here at Abundant Housing Massachusetts. Again, we've been doing it since 2020. I've been in this role since 2021. Can talk a little bit in a minute about some of the work that we have been doing. But to give a little bit more context to the situation that we are facing in Massachusetts, as the representative said, housing is complex, it's complicated, and but it's like the number one issue that when you poll Massachusetts residents these days, that rises to the top, because the lack of homes that people can afford to buy or rent is hitting people at all income levels and in all stages of life. We have an extreme housing shortage here in Massachusetts. One statistic that I like to present is in the 30 years prior to 1990, so the 30 years leading up to 1990, Massachusetts, as the entire Commonwealth, built about 900,000 homes across the state, really with the concentration in Eastern Massachusetts. 900,000 homes in the 30 years leading up to 1990. In the 30 plus years since 1990, we have built about half as many, just over 450,000 new homes. And that's at a time where our economy has grown significantly, particularly here in Eastern Massachusetts. We've added a lot of jobs, and population has grown steadily in Massachusetts, and particularly in Eastern Massachusetts. Our population doesn't grow quite as fast as some places like the Sun Belt or Florida, places like that. But we are growing. We're adding jobs, we're growing, and we're just not building homes for people to live in. People who are growing up in Massachusetts that want to remain in Massachusetts, people that may be moving to Massachusetts and want to stay after college or grad school or for jobs. Really people of all walks of life, and that's really, really critical. When we try to put in perspective, and there's been a lot of research from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council and other researchers, put into sort of context like the extent of our shortage. The estimate is that we are, based on current demand for homes in Massachusetts, falling about 200,000 homes short of what we need for everyone to have a house that they can afford. 200,000 homes is the current shortage. At the rate that we are building housing, however, we're not building it fast enough. And the expectation is that if current trends persist, our shortage will grow to approximately 400,000 homes short of what we need in the next 25 years. So that's the extent. 200,000 right now, about 400,000, with the vast majority of that being here in Eastern Massachusetts. Other ways to look at our housing availability right now is looking at our vacancy rate, right? It's sometimes counterintuitive, but a healthy housing market will have a higher vacancy rate. That means more units that are not occupied than we have right now in Eastern Massachusetts. What economists have projected or predicted or estimated, I guess is the right term right now, is a 5% vacancy rate. So 5% of your units being vacant. 5 to 7% is a healthy vacancy rate. For rental housing here in Massachusetts, we are at a vacancy rate of below 2%. And for home ownership, we are below 1%. And we do often hear, well, there's a lot of vacant units. Why don't we make owners of vacant units, house homeless people or low income people? The reality is that when you have more vacancy than we have here in Massachusetts, the property owners, the landlords, actually have to compete for tenants rather than tenants having to compete for housing. This is a situation we've seen more and more in the greater Boston area. I'm sure folks are very familiar with the home ownership market. It's been for a decade or more. A home goes on the market. There's maybe one weekend of open house. On Monday, the bids are due. You get dozens or more bids, many of them well over the listed asking price, and some of them are all cash offers, right? So that is people trying to be in the homeownership market, having to compete with each other. We have seen this particularly in Boston and Cambridge. We've seen this actually happen in the rental market now. So we have seen when an apartment is available, a landlord will list it, and you will have tenants lining up outside the door to view the unit, and wealthier tenants, wealthier renters are actually offering landlords above asking price. Okay, I see one. I think that says 1 minute left. All right. So renters, wealthier renters are now actually out competing lower income renters as well. So that's just a little bit of the context. What we are pushing at Abundant Housing Massachusetts is zoning reform. There are some real important steps we've taken as a Commonwealth. Happy to address these more in the questions. The MBTA Communities Act, which is, I'm sure, something that's on the Holliston town agenda right now, is one important step. We have also, at Abundant Housing, focused a lot on accessory dwelling units, legalizing backyard cottages, in-law suites, granny flats, whatever you may call them, to be built as of right in single-family zones across the state. And that was something that was in the Affordable Homes Act that was recently passed. So ultimately, I'll wrap it up now. What we want to see is a market that allows people of all walks of life more access to more places. We don't want to see people across low-income folks having to compete with wealthier folks for a very limited stock of housing. We're advocating for housing abundance. And we think reforming zoning and how we do permitting approvals on the local level is how we will get there. So happy to answer more in the questions. Sorry for going over my time, and thank you.
That's all right. Great. Thank you, Jesse. Appreciate that. So, Brian, why don't you share your thoughts? Maybe a little more focused on Holliston, I think, but certainly anything that's contextual for the Commonwealth is fine as well.
Sure. Can you hear me? Does that work? Yes, hopefully I won't be as exciting as Jesse, but so there's a couple of things facing Holliston that we have to deal with on the state and policy level, as well as other local housing initiatives that we've been focused on in the last couple of years. Jesse alluded to the MBTA Communities Law, which we are right in the middle of in Holliston, trying to get the zoning passed, zoning amendment passed, and zoning land in our community to comply with that act. The act was adopted in 2021. It affects 177 communities in Massachusetts that are have public transportation going through them or are adjacent to communities with direct access to public transportation. That includes James's representation communities of Holliston, Hopkinton, Sherburne, and Millis all have to comply with this law, as well as surrounding towns, Medway and Ashland around Holliston as adjacent communities. In Holliston, the MBTA districts will be required to comply with all of the requirements of site plan review. So you can't just do anything you want in these zoned areas. And to adopt the law, the town meeting needs to pass by a majority vote for the proposed zoning amendments by December 31 of 2024. Smaller communities like Sherborne, I think they get an extra year because they have less population. Our Holliston town meeting is scheduled for October 21st at 7 p.m. where that bylaw will be addressed, and a full explanation of the MBTA communities law will be addressed as well. Failure to comply with this law, as you might have heard in the news, will automatically result in loss of state funding for infrastructure projects such as roads, bridges, water and sewer improvements, et cetera. They also risk enforcement action. I think there's an enforcement action against the town of Milton, some other ones that have been implicated in that as well for not complying with the law. It's important to note that the act does not require the towns to build the units that they're zoning for, and they can be zoned in areas that are already developed, if you will. And it doesn't require the town to provide any extra infrastructure for roads or water or sewer or anything like that. That is all on the private owner of the land and the developer, okay? So in Holliston, we have to comply with the minimum of zoning 50 acres of land with a density of 15 units per acre, or a total of 750 units. We're a community with 5,562 units per the 2020 census. So per the guidelines, we have to do 750 units at a minimum. There are no constraints where in an adjacent community where those can be located in towns with direct transportation access. They have to be adjacent or close, within half a mile, I think, of the actual train station or the train line or bus routes, et cetera. So we hired a consultant to help us with this with some grant funding, J.M. Goldson, who's a prominent land use consultant for affordable housing in particular in Massachusetts, to lead us through the process. And we formed a working group locally to, guide the local process, because J.M. Goldson, doesn't live here, right? So we took stakeholders from the planning board, zoning board of appeals, housing trust, housing authority, and staff as stakeholders in housing issues in the town to look at proposed areas for these zones that we have to create. After several forums and surveys, et cetera, we have plenty of public input opportunities, which some of you have attended, I know. The working group has chosen 2 districts, one near the Ashland line and one out on Summer Street, with a combined area of 88 acres and a modeled unit capacity of about 1,458 units and a density of 20.5 units per acre. What happens is when these proposed districts go for approval at the state, they look very closely at all of the the developability of the areas. So they take into account wetlands and all these other things. So you cannot just zone things that aren't developable. You need to prove that someday they could be developed with this density that we're proposing. So tomorrow night, there's a public hearing at the planning board that will go through all of the details on the MBTA Communities Act. You can join by Zoom. There are additional materials on the front page of the town website where you can look at frequently asked questions, the technical memo that was produced by our consultant, with all of the materials that we as a working group came up with as a proposal for consideration by the planning board and ultimately consideration by town meeting in the entire town. So that's one statewide initiative that we have to deal with. The other one is, as Jesse alluded to, is the accessory dwelling unit bylaw. We already had one in Holliston. It's more restrictive than what the state is requiring all towns to adopt. So now anyone in a residential district can do an accessory dwelling unit up to 900 square feet, but not more than half the gross floor area of the principal dwelling. As I said, they're allowed in residential zones. There are restrictions on the intensity and height and building separation requirements and things like that. You're not allowed to do short-term rentals, so you can't do this for Airbnb. There's no related party kind of requirements like we have now. And you must comply with all of the water and sewer requirements, Title V, groundwater protection districts, all of those elements that we have in our bylaw already. We have to provide one unit per, one space, parking space per ADU unit. Homeowners are allowed to do more than one, but they have to get a special permit. The ADU for one unit in your dwelling is allowed by right. Okay, so tomorrow night at the planning board, they're addressing the ADU as well. They're going to show the proposed zoning bylaw amendments for both of those at town that will be addressed at town meeting on October 21st. And the ADU law will apply to all of your communities, James, Millis, Hopkinton, Sherburne, and all throughout the state. The other thing that Holliston has been really focused on in the last couple of years is, one, we did a strategic plan, which had some housing goals and initiatives in them. And we, as a working group, produced a housing production plan also with grant funds, and J.M. Goldson helped us do that plan as well. So we did a comprehensive housing production plan with a lot of housing public input that helped us design and think about what our challenges are, what our opportunities are, and how we might work to achieve those goals. So just as a overview, some of the challenges that we have, as Jesse alluded to, the rising costs and declining availability of housing within our town. The median house price has almost doubled from $453,000 to $822,000 from 2017 to 2024. So that gives you the order of magnitude. And this is not the only community that's facing these kinds of rising housing costs. So you think about young families trying to buy their first home, and it's really very constraining and stressful. Housing costs disproportionately impacts, as you might understand, is low and moderate income households. So the wealth gap between those who have and those who have not is just getting wider and wider, and it's harder for those folks in the lower end of the spectrum to be able to compete for the housing. Multifamily and rental options are more and more scarce in Holliston. I think in Holliston, most of the housing stock is single family homes, as Jesse alluded to, 84% with and the high median price creates barriers to entry for lower income households. And we also have difficulties with, we heard a lot of feedback from some of our older residents in town that, the Holliston housing stock is aging, it's not accessible. There are not new accessible options for them to partake in. So that's another key component of our housing production plan where we would like to, focus. I think 21% of residents over 65 have some sort of disability in Holliston, and our housing stock doesn't support that ADA accessibility. So some of the opportunities that we found, we talked about challenges, opportunities. We have 40 new affordable subsidized housing inventory units that are in the pipeline through projects in Holliston. We're exploring wastewater infrastructure and additional wastewater treatment. So you can have density on smaller parcels when you're able to do that if you don't need to put a septic system in the ground, right? School enrollment is on the decline, so there's a lot of perception that if you build more housing, it's going to kill our schools, and it's going to be very difficult for us to manage that. We have a declining school enrollment in Holliston with our aging population. Folks are having less children because I think it's more expensive. We have the ADU bylaw that's coming, gonna broaden, so that may increase options within our town. We have senior focused overlay districts. We're encouraging mixed use development, and we have a strong and well-funded housing trust, which is the municipal arm that accesses CPA funds to specifically invest in affordable housing. And that's what I have been doing with the Housing Trust in Holliston. Some of the goals are compliance with our subsidized housing inventory. So we're required by the town to be protected from 40B projects, to have a 10% of our housing units be affordable. We have 4.56%. So we need to create more affordable housing if we're going to overcome that. We need to support our seniors, promote moderate and accessible housing options if we can manage to do that. And Karen Sherman and Travis have been very good about, investing a lot of time on these initiatives so that they can, but they're going to need more staff support in order to do it. I have some ideas about longer term strategies, but just one thing before I close. The Housing Trust is well funded right now. We have about $1 million. We've been relatively quiet since COVID, and we're trying to activate that again. We are welcoming new members who would like to join and be leaders within our community to help us with some of these initiatives and be creative. And we want to explore possibly more Habitat for Humanity projects, critical home repairs for seniors, which I think we did 9 projects and $150,000 worth of projects with Habitat for seniors. Down payment assistance, maybe more single family buy down, or similar programs that support affordable housing. So we've spent a lot of time. I think we have a lot of goals. We have a lot of objectives, but now we need to implement and actually get something done. So that's what we're faced with now. But I think Travis and Karen Sherman have done the hard work of leading us all through getting all the policy in place and getting our goals set. So now we need to support them, and the town needs to support some of these initiatives if we want a diverse housing stock and diverse, well-housed population in Holliston. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Brian. So I have a quick question for each of you, for Jesse and Brian, and then we'll throw it open to the audience. So my first question is for Jesse. And Jesse, both you and Brian mentioned the MBTA Communities Act, which passed before I took office, by the way, not that it matters. And we do have an upcoming vote in Holliston. Maybe at some point, if Travis wants to talk a little more, he can, although Brian gave a good explanation. I am supporting it, to be clear, because I don't want us to be penalized. However, and this is my question to you, Jesse, and I don't know if you were involved in this. It's kind of a generic question. I don't know if you were involved, if you have thoughts. Why is it, with this dearth of affordable housing in Massachusetts, that the MBTA Communities Act has no provisions for seniors, for low income, for town employees, for veterans, for first responders? I just don't understand why that wasn't part of the plan all along. I have not gotten a good answer on it. The governor's office gave me a briefing last week because they know we have an upcoming vote, and they talked about all this polling that shows if you offer these things, people will be supportive. And I said, excuse me, I said, that sounds great. I said, I want us to do those things. Why wasn't that part of the act? Jesse, do you have any insights? Because I'm still not quite clear. I know it's going to add to the housing stock, but I don't know why we didn't put those provisions in there. Any thoughts on that?
I can't say I was involved in, January of 2021 when it passed. So I don't know all the dealings that went on Beacon Hill to get it passed. And remember, it passed at the 11th hour as part of the economic development bill in the extended COVID session. So there was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. The goal of this program of this law was to address the fact that the majority of communities in Eastern Massachusetts did not have any zoning for multifamily housing at all to be built. And that is what has driven our housing crisis. It is what has made it so that some communities are completely off limits to people who may be of moderate or lower incomes. And the goal behind this was to increase the stock overall, and research from places all around the country and the world has proven that increasing the housing stock across the board does help moderate or even reduce prices. The city of Austin last year built more housing units than any other city in America. They substantially reformed their zoning. I'm not saying that Holliston or any suburban community is going to be Austin. Even Boston will not be necessarily Austin. As a result, rents have fallen on average 7% across the board. We've seen this happen in places like Minneapolis that said you can build up to 4 units on every lot across the city there. Seattle has done substantial reform. In all of these cases, it's reform to increase the stock of housing through multifamily housing broadly without any specific requirements for certain populations, like you mentioned. In all cases, housing prices have stabilized. We have among the highest rental and homeownership prices in the country in Greater Boston. And so we needed to do something that stemmed that. And I think this was the approach. Towns are allowed to adopt an inclusionary zoning requirement that would be reviewed by the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. That is allowed under the MBTA Communities Act and the guidelines that the state has put out to govern that program. Some have done that, requiring that 10 or 15% of the units that theoretically will be built under this law are affordable to low and moderate incomes. The reality is that when we have seen housing production in multifamily housing throughout the sort of MBTA region, the 177 communities that are covered by this law in recent decades, the vast majority of them have been for targeted populations, seniors, veterans. We have not seen a substantial stock of family housing built across the region. And so that's why this law was crafted to say the housing built in these districts has to be, I forget what the language is, available for families, suitable for families, I believe is the language, and it wasn't targeted to specific populations. Usually when you build housing for veterans or some specific populations like that, it comes with a subsidy, and this is not a subsidy program. That theoretically could be layered in, but that wasn't the goal of the program. So I hope that answers it to some degree.
Great. Yes.
So just with respect to the affordability requirements, so the state is requiring that towns do not impose more than 10% affordability in the MBTA Communities Act, because I think that they're trying to incentivize housing to get built. So it's an incentive for developers to actually do it, because if they do it under 40B, you're going to do at least 20% at low income or 25% at 80% or less of the median income. And that's a significant subsidy for a developer to invest in a project, and it weighs heavily on whether they actually put a shovel in the ground. So I think more is more, and the supply and demand law, that's, I think, what Jesse's alluding to, that it should at least level pricing and maybe reduce by increasing supply.
Well, thank you both. I hope it does help. And clearly, more housing will help. But it's just something that's kind of stuck with me. It's like, why wasn't that part of it? But we'll see how it plays out. So now I have a question for Brian. It's kind of related. Actually, I had to change my notes, but no, not in a bad way. Well, in a bad way, in something you said. But so Brian, you've been part of Habitat. And Diverse Holliston, part of their aspiration statement is that we want to be a welcoming community, which I absolutely support and agree to. But what I say all the time is it's kind of hard to be a welcoming community when the price tag changed it now to $800,000. I thought it was 7, but geez, I mean, that excludes 95% of Massachusetts. No matter their color, their background, their mortgage, it is getting so expensive. Young people, seniors trying to downsize. I mean, it's a conundrum. And I was going to ask you, what do we do? And you actually said you have some long-term strategies. So why don't you tell us? Because it's going to take a long time, right? And so go ahead.
Let me look and see what my strategies are. These are in the housing production plan, and this is also published on the town website. But some of the longer term strategies were to create zoning incentives to encourage the diverse housing. So within those MBTA communities, maybe you could do things like duplexes or cluster houses, starter homes, things like that. There's no reason why you couldn't do that. Development of town-owned land that hasn't been designated for other uses like, recreation or other things like that. We occasionally have a tax title property. We, as Habitat, we developed town-owned property out on Concord Street. That was something that the town took for taxes, and we Habitat bought that property from the town and redeveloped it for a family. You could do our micro implementation by the Housing Trust. We only have so much money from CPA funds to subsidize existing housing stock, which is what we did. That program was, we'd buy a house at a market price and sell it at a subsidized price. So the seller gets a full, the full price for their home, and we subsidize the buyer and deed restrict the home in perpetuity. So that's a pretty good, that was a pretty good program, pretty successful. And then people can be in the fabric of the communities where they belong, not in a, building that's all low income or something. But we need to pursue like really funding sources. I mean, that's the thing. You need money to subsidize these things because no one's going to do this for free. No one's going to build a house for $500,000 and sell it for $200,000. The money has to come from somewhere, right? So we have to do public-private partnerships and things like that, use organizations like Habitat who have their own funding sources or other charitable missions to make things happen. But the only way you're going to get this stuff done, I think, is with some kind of subsidy. There's got to be money, right? Like we talked about, wastewater infrastructure is huge in a town like Holliston. When you think about how forward thinking, the Northeast is, we're so backward compared to the rest of the country who has, master plan communities with wastewater infrastructure and all kinds of interesting, diverse ideas because they're able to support, the development. So that would be one that I think is really important for a town like Holliston. And then outreach and education, forums like this, so people understand what the problem is, because it's hard to solve a problem if you don't know what it is. So the more that, we educate folks, the better chance we have of overcoming our obstacles.
Great, thank you. Okay, I have some other things to share at some point, but I think we should now turn it over to the audience. If anybody has questions, and Maria, I think Maria has a microphone. And if anybody has a question, if someone has a question on Zoom, raise your hand on Zoom and we can plug you in that way. We've got one here. Maria, go ahead. I guess Maria's coming. And I would say if you have a specific questions for one of the speakers, direct it to them, but then we'll give the other one a chance to add on a comment.
Hi, thanks, Liz Dembitzer. Is this on? Yeah. I live in Holliston. This is kind of I guess this is for Jesse. I don't really know a lot about the history of housing in the country, but it strikes me that relying on kind of market forces and private development interests, it's always going to be a problem without the government stepping in and assisting. Like after World War II, wasn't there just huge loan programs by the government or huge amounts of housing built? And I don't think there was a housing crisis then. So I'm just wondering, outside of, zoning and making things kind of more favorable for a developer, are there other kind of bigger initiatives that you can see that would help?
Yeah, so absolutely, the federal government invested after World War II in pretty substantial increase in public housing around the country. And in fact, in Massachusetts, we're fairly unique. I think we're in one of 3 states that around the same time we developed our own stock of state-owned public housing that has always been completely independent of the federal government. Um, all that being said, the reality is that the vast majority of housing that has ever been built in the United States has been built by private actors. The public housing that was built, in the 40s and 50s, was limited to certain income levels. And initially, it was targeted towards veterans coming back from the war, and then opened up to more broadly to people of lower incomes. And then because of just the pendulum of political change in this country, we broadly divested really from our public housing stock, both on the federal level and on the state level here in Massachusetts. And so, I do believe strongly we need to reinvest in public housing in this country. We need to bring it up to standards, and we need to try to livable standards, and we need to try to build more. In fact, the Affordable Homes Act that passed at the end of the last legislative session is a $5 billion borrowing bill for a variety of housing related programs. One of the largest line items the state is authorized to borrow for is investing in the rehabilitation, the greening, like sustainability, and expansion of our state public housing stock, again, which is unique here in Massachusetts. And so I think all of that's really important. The Affordable Homes Act also included a provision that would allow the state to create a social housing revolving loan fund. So social housing being slightly different than the traditional low-income housing tax credit program that funds a lot of affordable housing development in this country right now. That really would, in some ways, be an expansion of our public housing stock. So there is a pilot that's authorized through that act. But it does remain the fact that I don't know what percentage, but the vast majority of housing that we need, housing that will be built, just will always continue to be built on the private market, because we just don't have the political will, certainly on the federal level, to make the type of investment that we once made as a country. We can fight for it, and I think that's a worthy cause. But we have a housing crisis right now, and we need every tool that we can have to expand our housing stock, whether it's the preservation and expansion of public housing, making the housing that's built on the market be more affordable, and in giving homeowners the ability to do things like building accessory dwelling units in their backyard or in their existing buildings. So it's really going to take an all of the above approach. It's definitely going to take public investment. It's going to take private actors, and it's going to take residents and communities stepping up and doing what needs to be done on the funding side, on the zoning side, on the permitting side. And we have a lot to do, because I think we're in one of the worst situations here in Eastern Massachusetts, one of the worst situations in the country when it comes to the affordability and accessibility of our housing stock. So we need every tool we can have.
You're good?
Yep.
I just wanted to add one thing. Thank you so much, Jesse. Really helpful. And I think especially your last comment about it's going to take this panoply of approaches. Haley Fetro was unable to join us, so I just wanted to jump in because she might have commented on this a little bit. I had Ed Augustus out here. He's the new secretary for housing and livable communities. They keep changing the name, but I think I have it right. But we had a meeting with the housing authority director. She actually runs Hopkinton, although she represents us here, and we had some of the others as well. And two things came up, and I'm really pleased they've made some progress. One of them is in the Affordable Homes Act, and I think Jesse alluded to this. there's a significant amount of money for repairs. Here we are in the middle of a housing crisis, and we had so many public housing units vacant because the maintenance hadn't been kept up with, because so many communities didn't have enough money to make the appropriate repairs. A significant amount of money $2 billion has gone into that. It's a bond bill, so we'll see how much of it actually really gets in. We'll save my comments on bond bills for later. But in any event, I'm sure a significant amount of money will be there, and I will advocate for our towns to get that. The other thing is, and let me be clear about this, I believe that public housing should be available to anybody who's eligible for it. Let's start with that comment. We know in the past, housing authorities in some communities around Massachusetts didn't want anybody coming in that looked different, that was different. We don't want that. However, it is human nature to want to be around people like you. So the way the system was set up, you could check a box and say, I'll go anywhere in Massachusetts, and it just clogged the system. And the reality is, when people got their notice that they had an opportunity, they were like, well, I'm not going there. And one stark example for me is there was someone in Hopkinton that was trying to get housing for months, and finally gets invited. She gets a place in Lowell. And she goes, Lowell, I'm not going to Lowell, Massachusetts. Meanwhile, literally at the same time, there was somebody in Millis who had no place to go, and who was from Lowell, wanted to be in Lowell, and took a place in Millis, was walking 2 miles a day because she didn't have a car. I mean, it's like, this is Massachusetts. We're not smart enough to develop a computer system that can match people. So, and here's my comment that I said to the secretary, and they are changing this. They're actually, the housing directors are pleased because the system's not as clogged as before. I said, like all of us, when we think about where we're going to live, we think about, where's my social network? Where are the people that I know? Where's my doctors? Where the grocery stores I shop at, the ethnic store, whatever it is. We all tend to think about those things. I mean, for us, it was schools, but then it was all these other things that are important on why we ended up in Holliston. I think it's fair to ask everyone to do a little of that research and pick their 10 places. And you could still say, and if one of those isn't open, I'll go anywhere. And there are people who will go anywhere, but most people, that's not the case. So anyway, there's a couple things going on that will help, because I could not believe, as a new representative, here we are in the middle of a housing crisis, and we had empty public housing units in our district, which was kind of sad. Okay, go ahead, Maria. Next question. I think there was one up here or back there.
Over here, and I think, sir, did you have a question?
Hi, my name is.
Oh.
Hi, my name is David, and I have a question about the wastewater system. How is that just, something on the back burner, or is that something that Holliston's actually going to do or are doing now?
Brian's going to try, but I think we've got Travis online too, so maybe we'll do both. Go ahead.
We do. So I understand that the Economic Development Committee is working on that charge to do something at least localized in downtown. I don't think it's town-wide. That's my rudimentary understanding, but maybe Travis can fill us in on that. If Travis is there.
Can people hear me?
Yes.
All right. I have a number of children crawling all over the place, so I'll leave my camera off for the moment. So I think the biggest update right now, the town finally had some positive news from NASDEP. So in the short term, what we're looking at is leveraging an existing, the only publicly owned wastewater treatment plant in the town of Holliston is on Linden Street. It services the Woodland Street School Complex, which is Placentino Miller and Rams. That's about 20 years old. So over the last 3 years with ARPA funds, we've invested in money and making sure that that is good for the next 20 years. It needed new technology. It needed a lot of new infrastructure. So it is now, a lot of work has been put into making that the best that it can be. The other thing that we have been doing in utilizing some ARPA funding, which is federal funding that came through COVID, is looking into the ability to leverage that plant to take flow from the downtown area, because we know that in the downtown area, and we did study this with the MAPC, that the opportunities for various types of businesses are stymied by our lack of wastewater options. We also have pretty densely populated and packed in septic systems, which from an environmental standpoint is also not ideal. So we did get some good news last week, actually, from Mass DEP, who's approved our scope of work for the concept of taking the flow from downtown and sending it to the wastewater treatment plant. I think people who've been in town for a lot longer than that will remember a time where the town was looking to sewer the entire town. Certainly, this is a much smaller scope and scale than the discussions 20 and 30 years ago. However, I think one of the things that it'll present us with is a requirement to set up a sewer commission and a sewer district, which then can begin to look for other options. I think the town has kicked the tires on, you know, other septic and wastewater solutions throughout town, right? There are other options than simply connecting to a large sewer like the MWRA, which is a place that I used to work, and is not necessarily accepting new sewer customers. So I think right now getting it moving in the downtown area is, I think, where we are at the moment. We got some good news from DEP, and the select board currently between now and October is discussing creating the sewer commission to deal with all of the logistics that come with the next steps of that process now that we have some good news from DEP. Additionally, I would point out, with the help of Rep. Marina DeRosa and our legislators in the state level, we did reach out to Congressman McGovern, Senator Markey, and Warren. We've asked for congressionally directed spending, which apparently is moving. It will be delayed, obviously, based on everything going on in November. We've told that we may have that money for real in January of 25. So we are looking in the next few months here to have a real progress on a potential downtown sewer district. As it relates to housing, that probably is not going to solve this in the short term. But getting the ball rolling on actual, regional wastewater solutions in Holliston is a major step for us. And so we're excited about that.
So I guess my question was about if you're gonna try and develop Holliston as far as affordable units and things like that, wouldn't it be a good idea to have a sewage system? And wouldn't that, kind of move things along?
I couldn't agree more. I think that's a very good point. And I think it's something we should be focused on long-term to try to solve. I think it will make us a more vibrant community.
So are the developers just kind of overlooking us because, if they build, we'll say 50 units, they're gonna need space for septic system.
Absolutely. It's part of the calculus about how much land they need to buy and whether it perks and all of that. Yep.
And so, with all the new laws, Holliston will probably overlook, you said 40B housing. I would guess that would take care of a lot of this problem. Like I know you need like.
You mean the affordability problem?
Not the affordability, but the land itself. Okay, say a contractor comes in, there's no sewage system, no citywide sewage system.
Right.
So they have to have space for a sewage area. So if you only have if you only have 2 acres, you can realistically only build 2 homes. Okay. But if you're using 40B housing, essentially you could build more homes, correct? But you'd still have to have a space for a septic system.
That's absolutely right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't mean to hog the microphone, but I do have one more question. And I want to know, what does the T have to do with Holliston? I mean, I don't see any trains, I don't see any buses. Why?
We do have MW, what is it called? RTA, which connects you to the Ashland stations. We're adjacent to a community that has active, rail lines. So by default, we're tagged as an adjacent community.
I get you.
But you got to hear another one of James's pet peeves, which is nobody's walking to the train from Holliston, Millis, Sherburne, right? And again, and that's fine, and I don't mind helping, but and we don't get the ride. So that's my next issue to deal with. You want to count us as an MBTA community? Why aren't we getting the ride? Okay.
Okay, one more question for, just for the town. Uh, uh, is Holliston willing to change zoning to build more housing?
I mean, we have to comply. We don't have to. I hope we comply with the MBTA Communities Act, but it's a question. I mean, it's a question that the town will have to face. You know, if we want to be more affordable, if we want more senior housing, whatever, that it's things that are going to have to be looked at. But who knows? I mean, it's up to the town.
Yes, I would agree with that. And any, because of our form of government, we have to go through town meeting. I do believe, and maybe Jesse knows this, I thought that with respect to zoning changes or rezoning, that the last administration made it a majority versus a 2/3 majority to change the zoning in town. Is that correct, Jesse?
Yeah, yeah, that was actually sort of in parallel to the MBTA Communities Act and the same economic development bill. It used to be that any zoning change in Massachusetts required a supermajority vote of whatever municipal body passes zoning, because it varies from community to community, town council, town meeting, planning boards, etc. That made certain types of zoning changes, like allowing accessory dwelling units or some multifamily zoning districts, very, very hard to get. There was, particularly with ADUs, there was a number of town meetings in the maybe 10 years prior to 2021, where there was an ADU bylaw that failed with more than 50% of the town meeting vote, because the threshold was that supermajority. They couldn't get the supermajority. So yes, it was changed so that things like accessory dwelling units, transit-oriented development, anything under the MBTA Communities Act, et cetera, could be passed with that simple majority, which particularly in towns with the town meeting form of government is an important change. Yeah.
Hi, this is for Jesse. In the rush to develop more housing, I think it's important to remember that whatever we build, we're going to be living with for a long time, both in terms of, how it is, how it functions in the world, and also in terms of traffic and things like that. So I was also wondering, I hear a lot about private equity firms buying up single family homes and driving the housing crisis in other parts of the country. And I was wondering if there was a way to quantify that effect here in Massachusetts, probably not so much in Holliston, and if there was anything that could be done about that, if it's adding significantly or not at all, or maybe a little to our housing crisis. I think that should be addressed. The other thing is, I see a lot of these like 5/1 type developments in Framingham. And to my mind, they're an abomination. And so I'm much more of a fan of ecological development, of cooperative housing and social housing that's much more responsive to the environment, and to the aesthetic sensibility too, and how it works with our town. And then the other part of our infrastructure is traffic. So like for us, the main route to the train station in Ashland are these tiny back road country lanes where people exercise. And it just seems like pushing housing before we solve some of these other problems, because it's a crisis. I understand that. And on the other hand, it should be done much more sensitively, in my opinion, and not just as a way of like getting a lot of developers to come in, make really big places and leave. Because I've heard that some of the places in Ashland that they built are having problems with like chronic leakage, quality problems, livability problems, a lack of responsiveness from managers and stuff like that. So I wouldn't want to rush into a situation like that for Holliston.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you on all those points. I'm sympathetic. I think your first question on the role of private equity, certainly, I mean, it's something to look at. There was a report the Metropolitan Area Planning Council did, I think, earlier this year or late last year, trying to quantify the impact of that in Massachusetts. I don't remember. I mean, I think there is some evidence that that is happening. The scale that it's happening is not clear yet here in Massachusetts. I would say that, our housing crisis and the housing shortage we have in Massachusetts has been a long time coming, and it's sort of predated the maybe last 5 years or so, roughly speaking, of this sort of national conversation, the role of private equity in buying up single families. And although that certainly is potentially a factor, I think there are other major factors, namely our failure to build the homes that Massachusetts residents need for the last 30 or 40 years. And so that's what I would say on that. I don't know that I'm going to remember off the top of my head all of your points. I think broadly speaking, what I would say is, yes, we do have a housing crisis right now. I think the goal of the MBTA Communities Act is to say that, every community should play a role in trying to figure out an approach to addressing it. Holliston does not have the same requirements to zone for multifamily housing that Framingham has, or certainly that Newton or Brookline or Cambridge have, right? And so it's all scaled. If the goal in Holliston is to zone for 750 homes in the coming years, that's in contrast to, just for scale, Cambridge has to zone for 13,000 homes, right? So we're asking the bigger towns and cities to do more than we're asking the little cities, but we are asking everyone to do something. The way the law is crafted is still very deferential to local decision making. Brian talked a little bit about all the considerations that town meeting will have to go through in Holliston and across the region. Where is the district going to be placed? What within the law and the guidelines, what additional review will be included? Site plan review, for instance. A variety of factors like that. The requirement is for 15 units per acre, which is admittedly probably more than your standard density in Holliston right now. But in reality, 15 units per acre isn't actually those 5/1 buildings that you're referencing in Framingham and Ashland. It's a triple decker, your traditional sort of Boston, 3-decker neighborhood. So those are denser. I agree. But we're not talking about filling a huge zoning district with 5/1s. And so I think that there are other considerations and deference to local decision making that can go into that. And certainly planning is important. This is an opportunity presented by this law and the requirement that Holliston and every of the 176 other towns comply with it, to do some planning, some thoughtful conversations in the community about what type of housing, where should it go, taking into account some of the things you addressed about how people use roads, what roads are suitable for or not suitable for. All of that can go into the conversation. This isn't the state coming and saying you have to allow 120, 200 unit buildings on every parcel across town by any stretch. So there is a lot of local conversation and knowledge that can go into this decision making within the confines of the law and the state guidelines that regulate the implementation. So I don't know that I addressed everything you said, but I think that's how I would respond to the bulk of it. One other thing I would say, this is, as I think it was the representative said, this is a zoning mandate. You have to zone. It doesn't necessarily require building. Or maybe it was Brian that said that. The reality is that zoning for 750 units in Holliston doesn't mean that 750 units will be built overnight. They may not even ever be built. And anything that is built will probably be built in the coming decades, multiple decades. We're not going to see an onslaught of development in Holliston. Mark my words.
Thanks. Hi there. Sorry, that was really loud. My name is Cynthia. I actually work at the senior center here in Holliston. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. I have been there for almost 10 months now. I have not housed one person. I've probably taken at least 12 different applications, probably more, and other people that have been in the pipeline. There's just nothing available for them. The online application, which is called CHAMP, automatically checks every single box. If you are an older person, you're trying to navigate through this online process, you have to go through and uncheck every box, which is, I think, part of the problem of why you're getting people who are getting housing offers in Lowell when they really want to be in somewhere in their, where their family is and their neighbor. And that really needs to be fixed and addressed. Another kind of bee in my bonnet is these 55+ communities that are 55+ in name only. There is no requirements for them to have ADA accessibility. I put more grab bars in areas that are 55+ communities in town than I have single family homes in this past year. What was my other question? I did have a question. I just had a few comments first. And then my comment or question is about addressing what the other gentleman said about having the septic. Is there any room for the space of talking with the state or the feds about possibly having some money come in to address that issue? We are not the only town that's on septic, but it is hampering our efforts to grow in this space. So that's my.
Who did you want to address that question to?
Maybe Travis, some of us have been here since the 90s and we had a shot at a substantial amount of money to do sewers in Holliston, and the town voted it down. So okay, I know. The point is we had an opportunity and it didn't pass. That's just the facts. But Travis or someone, do you want to talk to the larger issue? I mean, is there any possibility? Is there money out there that you're aware of? I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think to the gentleman's question before and to Cynthia's question now, we have the only reason we're moving as quickly as we are, and quite honestly, I think most people are frustrated with the fact that we're not moving quickly enough on the downtown sewer. The only reason we're able to move at the speed we've moved at, for what that's worth, is the fact that we already have a permitted wastewater treatment plant that we're asking to utilize, right? So part of this is, from an environmental standpoint, siting new wastewater disposal sites is incredibly difficult. Obviously all of those things have to follow similar, protocols to new septic systems, right? We have a lot of wetlands in town. We have a lot of areas that would prohibit that. And so the town has looked at a few different properties in the past. I know they looked at Rogers Road, which is now the community farm. They looked on the Milford side of town. This is me looking back through the history of it. And so I think the point would be, we've asked the federal government and the state for money for this particular sewer project. And, we asked for $5 million. It sounds like they're going to move about $1 million forward for us, which is certainly, we're not going to not accept. We love anything we can get that's not local taxpayer dollars. But the answer is, we've tried to move this project forward. And I think it does give me some concern that, we would not necessarily be able to fund through federal or state dollars a more widespread program. But I think we do have to get the ball rolling, as I was saying before. And then I think the other thing too is I think the rep mentioned, there's only so many games in town as it relates to large systems like the MWRA. On the North Shore, there's systems. On the South Shore, there's some systems. The Cape is going through this all right now. The reality is, in instances where there are towns getting pushed to deal with having, overly relied on septic and the environmental concerns that might come with it, the federal and state dollars are just not going to go far enough for them to kind of come and solve our problem for us. So we really have to push it ourselves. And that's why I think the downtown, getting that moving is the first step. But unfortunately, as we're talking about housing tonight, right, that's just not going to address some of these concerns. And so when we're looking at these 3A sites, which I can pull up online if people are interested to find where to find the information, it's right on our main page. But those sites, right, the way it's modeled to the state system, town meeting approves it in October, we have to give it to the state by the end of the calendar year. The modeling is all based on the density that can be handled from a site based on the septic capacity that the gentleman mentioned earlier. So, that is where we are in the short term. And I think, we will continue to work with state and federal, but they are, these are programs that we have a lot of competition for, right? When we know that from going through our downtown project.
Hi there. I wondered, following up on Dave's question and his remarks, if you can impose that the multifamily areas create local wastewater treatment plants just to serve them. And on your remark before, I think one of the reasons the other one in the 90s failed was because we drink our groundwater and we were sending a lot of water out of town. And I think the engineers came down on it, but we can talk about that another time. But as far as having localized wastewater treatment plants that are much smaller, maybe the size of Woodland Street or smaller for these areas would work. But I don't know if you have that in your bag of tricks.
I can try to address that. I think that right now, the way it works, a private developer has to create whatever the sewer infrastructure or septic capacity needs to comply with Title V on their project, on their land. It doesn't mean that, the town acting as an advocate for some kind of a master plan community, if they could work with a developer, that they could do a centralized treatment plant where folks participate or purchase gallonage in the system. I think Travis lives in Wayland, and they have a similar system over nearby the Stop and Shop that serves those condos and retail and other things like that, where it's a shared system. So it's been done. And actually, we developed a property in Sudbury where that's exactly what happened. The Whole Foods Center there in Sudbury has a big wastewater treatment plant in the back. So it can be done, but it has to be done. It has to be done collectively and with everybody participating.
Well, I'm from the neighboring town of Sherburne, and I've been attending meetings where we're involved in discussions like this. The septic issue is paramount. And in my community, 98% of the water is from private wells. So part of me feels like this is putting the cart before the horse. We've had multiple hearings to answer this woman's question where the developer has proposed 7 individual wells for a 38 unit development on 14 acres with a novel wastewater treatment that had provisional approval. People were terrified. Now it's been appealed to the Mass Housing Authority. On the other hand, we're trying to site near Framingham, create a zone where we could link up to hopefully Framingham or Natick and pass that at our town meeting. So I think we're all struggling with this cart before the horse in these rural communities. I've been a member of the Democratic Party forever. I am a strong proponent of affordable housing. I can't say that enough. But if we don't have clean drinking water in my community, and now we have wells going dry in Sherburne, I don't know if that's been happening in your town, that's a game changer. So I think there needs to be a lot more sensitivity to that. I'm going to put on another hat as a former professor at Boston College, and to respond to the ridiculous rents in Cambridge. These universities are sitting on buckets of endowment money. They need to house all their undergraduates, all of them, and half of their graduate students. I'd like to hear Jesse comment on that. Mayor Menino put pressure on Boston College and other universities to do just that. And I think the squeeze has lessened in recent years. And I've gone to meetings as a faculty representative in communities like Alston and Brighton, and those families are fed up. So what is the city of Boston and the governor doing to force these universities to create more student housing for their undergrads and their grads?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I live in Boston, so it's something that I'm intimately familiar with. One of the challenges is that well, a variety of challenges. The yes, the universities need to do more to house their graduate and undergraduate students. Actually think Harvard and MIT do a better job of that in Cambridge than most of the Boston-based universities do here, Northeastern being the largest university in the state. They need to build more housing. They need to build the housing on campus. The challenge, however, is that when there have been proposals to build some of these dorms, it then actually does face opposition from the community. So we all need to come together and figure out like what the approach is. I don't want to belabor it because I don't know if that's immediately applicable to Holliston. One other challenge with that is you can build a lot of on-campus housing, but then as university enrollments continue to increase, you're just bringing in more students. Northeastern, again, substantially grown its enrollment for years now and not kept up with housing, on campus housing. So it's really challenging. We need to all work together on that. I don't know what the state can do to limit universities from increasing enrollment, but that is, I think, where the challenge is, both opposition to on-campus housing when it is proposed, and then just like stemming the increase. I mean, students add a lot to our state, right? Like I was a graduate student at MIT. I feel like I brought a lot to that community. We have a vibrant economy because of the biotech and tech industry and that have sprouted out because of our universities. Like there is a lot of economic benefit to having these, not just for Boston and Cambridge, but for our entire region and state. So we don't want to like stop that, but yeah, it's a really difficult conversation in these student heavy communities. So I hear you and I sympathize. What the state can force them to do, I'm a little bit above my pay grade on that. So.
Maria wants to know if there's anyone on Zoom that has a question. I'm gonna get closer and see if there's a raised hand on the screen. Can't. Wait, there's one back there.
My name's Deb Moore and I live in Holliston, but I also own a triple decker that I grew up in another city called Taunton, but you might know it as Taunton. So anyways, my question for Jesse is, I'm a landlord, and what do you do to support landlords? Because I got a HUD loan, which I thought was great, no interest loan, but I have to rent to middle and low income. And when I started on this journey, I was very naive. My career was, or still is, a nurse. So I was used to helping people. And I got a flood of potential tenants. And I listened to all their stories of their difficulties in finding a place to live, all the trauma that they've endured, and I wanted to help everyone. So we started with 3 different families, and I will tell you, there is very little support for landlords. You become their caseworker, their social worker, their therapist, more than a landlord. And some of these programs that are already set up, you can't get in touch with them once you take the tenant as your tenant. There's no phone number to call somebody. If you do get a phone number, you leave a message, no one calls you back because you can't get a hold of their caseworker. And I take mostly Section 8 tenants. I have 2 incredible families now that I just love, but that has been a long time coming. I've had 17 tenants in 8 years. I've had to evict 2. Others I've threatened with notice to quit and told them, you really don't want to be evicted. So it would be better to move out now because it'll be harder for you to find an apartment. And some of them, come to the realization that they better do that. I have been scammed for thousands of dollars because there are people that I call professional tenants, and they go from landlord to landlord and they never pay a dime in rent. There are a lot of laws in Massachusetts that protect the tenants, and there are very few protections for the landlord. And it is just very difficult. My husband tells me practically every single day to sell it, but unfortunately, I'm the fourth generation that was brought up in that three-decker, and it's very hard to let it go. I would just like to see more help for landlords. The Section 8 tenants I get when I have a problem with them, I call the Taunton Housing Authority, and they tell me that's your problem. You know, you have to do something. We can't do anything to help you out. The most I've ever gotten from them, and there's a lot of great people that work there, don't get me wrong, is they may call them in to talk to them. Meanwhile, my house, my apartment has been vandalized. I call it vandalism because they've trashed the place. There's holes in walls. And this money that HUD has lent me, they have ruined the renovations. It's like there should be some help from the government to curtail some of this and not have it take forever to evict a tenant. To me, they should have consequences for bad behavior. And like I said, I have two great families now that I think are wonderful, and we have a great relationship. They respect my property, they pay their rent, and it's wonderful to have them. But for some of the other tenants, there are no consequences for bad behavior. They just go from landlord to landlord to landlord. And something needs to be done, because it's very discouraging if you want people to open up their homes and rent to people. Like my third floor apartment now, a man just moved in 6 weeks ago and I'm ready to evict him.
Mm.
And it's just a very difficult situation to be in, and landlords need more support. They need more help. They need to be able to get in touch with people, and the programs need to be able to have some clout in order to make these people, you know, lose their vouchers or whatever that needs to happen, so that they realize they're like laughing at us.
So I'm going to let Jesse answer the question because it's HUD and federal, but thank you for sharing that. And what troubles me is if you're not getting support as someone who's willing to rent to people who need this kind of housing, at some point you throw your hands up and say, the hell with this. We have a hot rental market in Massachusetts. I'm just going to go do market rentals. So, you know, to me as a public servant, we should be doing all we can to support people like you who are willing to do that. But Jesse, any thoughts on Deb's question?
Yeah, I mean, I sympathize. I thank you for sharing your story. It sounds like it's been difficult. I am, you know, grateful that you've stuck with it, and you've found some tenants now that seem to respect you and respect your property. And you know, I'm grateful for that. You know, yeah, the Section 8 program is a difficult one. Yeah, in a prior life, I actually did consulting for public housing authorities around the country, huge public housing authorities like, you know, Philadelphia, New Orleans, and places like that, New York. And, you know, the Section 8 program has been really severely underfunded. All HUD programs really have been severely underfunded for years. The Section 8 program, you know, doesn't really. I think because of the politics of Washington, D.C., there hasn't been substantial investment in any really HUD programs, even when there's been Democratic and therefore more friendly presidents. And so, you know, I think we need to think about advocacy on the federal level to, you know, perhaps next time there's a Democratic president and Democratic control of Congress, get more funding into that program that can work on landlord-tenant mediation, negotiation, things like that. You know, there are certainly advocacy organizations for tenants here in Massachusetts, the Mass Landlords is one that comes to mind. There's a small property owners association. We don't always align on every policy issue, but they are two organizations that come to mind as sort of representing the interests of landlords, and in most cases, those are small landlords, not the large development companies or corporate owners, individuals like you. In a couple places, Boston and Cambridge and Somerville, there are, and of course, those are particularly in the case of Boston, Cambridge, wealthier, like the towns, have resources. There are housing stability offices or Office of Housing Stability, whatever. And in Boston, it lives within the mayor's Office of Housing. That's the housing department for the city of Boston. And they field phone calls from landlords and tenants alike when there are conflict, not necessarily just Section 8 tenants and landlords, but that certainly could be included. And they can connect them at times to mediation. They can help landlords deal with difficult tenants in some ways, and vice versa, help tenants get through some challenging circumstances with their landlords. There also are some private organizations. Just a Start, which is a community development corporation based in Cambridge, does do landlord tenant mediation. They actually have mediators that they work with that can bring landlords and tenants together, who are willing to come together and talk through their conflicts. Again, I don't know that these are all going to be replicable on the level of every individual town in Eastern Massachusetts, or certainly throughout the state, but maybe there are opportunities to think about advocating for some, I don't know, Metro West regional landlord tenant mediation program, living in Metro West collaborative development or something. I don't know. Brian looks like has something to say on that. So yeah.
My wife's on the board of Metro West Mediation, which is based in Natick and does the whole, what's that? Oh, Andrea, my wife, Andrea. So, Deb, you could talk to Andrea. Maybe we can be a resource, for you. But they do specifically, they have a person on their staff that does a lot of, tenant landlord mediation.
I'd just like to say one more thing. If there was an inspection by the Section 8 company when the person is moving out, and that is dependent on them continuing their voucher, that would go a long, long way. One simple thing, they inspect every year to make sure that the landlord is doing everything they can to make it a safe and comfortable apartment. But when the tenant moves out, there is no inspection. And I have had the opportunity, as I said previously, holes in doors, holes in walls, that HUD loaned me the money to have renovated the first time. So one simple thing can solve a big problem. Have a final inspection and have consequences to that inspection.
So I think it's time to wrap up. Thank you all for participating. Thank you, Maria and the committee and all the volunteers. I think maybe we should give Jesse and then Brian maybe one to 2 minutes each of any closing thoughts, something to just leave as we leave tonight. I think the one thing I heard, this is a problem that's going to require so many different pieces to solve, right? It's not going to be one thing. There's no magic bullet. It's going to require a lot of hard work. But Jesse, do you have any closing comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point, Representative. Whether it's MBTA communities, legalizing accessory dwelling units, these are just picking away at the problem. There is so many other pieces that we need to address, from, where housing's built, how do we make sure it is affordable, who has access to it. There's just so many things. It's a continued conversation. I know in the last legislative session that ended, I guess technically on August 1st, there was a lot of focus on housing through that Affordable Homes Act, the Housing Bond Bill that we talked about a little bit at the beginning. I hope that there will be more conversation in the next legislative session. And also, I wish you all as Holliston residents luck as you work through all of these issues on the local level, including how you're going to implement this ADU law and the MBTA Communities Act. And I, wish you luck on that. And we're happy to be a resource. Abundant Housing Massachusetts. You can look us up online, abundanthousingma.org. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Jesse. And before I turn to Brian to maybe close us out, maybe I'll have one final comment. I did want to thank our technical folks for being here tonight. Thank you so much for helping us connect to both Zoom and here. Really appreciate it. So Brian, any final thoughts? And then I'll say a final goodbye.
Yes, I have a couple final thoughts. So just keeping it local, we have some public hearings coming up. One's tomorrow, where some of these issues are going to be discussed. Our staff has worked really hard to come up with what we think is a reasonable plan for Holliston. There's going to be a town meeting vote, so I'd encourage you to talk to your neighbors and friends about the requirement to comply with MBTA communities and not make it a controversy at town meeting, as well as the ADU law. People may have strong feelings about it, but we really don't have a lot of choices with regard to that as a state requirement. So we look for your support. We encourage you to come to town meeting and help us get it passed. And I thank you for attending. It's nice to see everybody.
Thank you all for coming today. And I'd like to thank our panelists and our moderator, and the town of Holliston for providing the space, managing the technology, Donna Muzzy, Christopher Mayo, and Pira Natarajan. I think I got it right, probably not. The Holliston Democratic Town Committee relies on our members and volunteers to host events like this. Please visit our literature table to learn how you can become involved. And I'd like to give a special thanks to the following town committee members for helping plan, organize, provide outreach, food, print and distribute flyers, etc. Cindy Burrow, Liz Dembitzer, Lee DeSorga, Pat Fuller, Mary Kinsella, Victoria Neeson, Laura Rainsford, Rich Rosenberry, and Jean Spera. Thank you all for coming tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.